Through more than 2 decades at Kenner and Hasbro, Aaron built worlds, told stories, and designed toys for some of pop culture's biggest names, including Transformers, Batman, Star Wars, and more. Join him as he explores the archives and tells you the stories of the creative process behind your favorite toys. This is the Toy Armada with your host, Aaron Archer.
So we're back again with another Toy Armada with Aaron Archer, and I'm your host, Protoman, and we're going to be doing a segment talking about the creation of one of the more obscure Transformer toy lines that didn't really have a lot of front-ended fiction and stuff like that. It really kind of came and went after a year and a half, but it did have a lot of important stuff in there. It had a lot of unique ideas and probably some interesting stories of how it came to be. But before we get into that, how you doing, Aaron?
I'm great today.
So today we are going to be talking about the 2003 toy line of Transformers Universe, primarily known by many fans as the repaint line, where a lot of old tooling and old designs and even some unreleased stuff found its place. And Universe has always been a weird one because while it had a comic book attached to it and a CD-ROM with some fiction, it didn't really have much of what, up to that point especially, Transformer toy lines were known for, which was representing some kind of story, some kind of lore. I mean, that same year we had Armada. Prior to that was the Robots in Disguise line. Like, when you think about what Transformers was up until 2003, if you had a toy line, you were pretty much trying to sell a story with that. And, you know, it was something usually attached to a cartoon or something. So how did this all start? Like, where did this idea even begin? Because it's such a weird thing, especially back then.
Well, segmentation overall is usually a marker of success of a brand. Not necessarily in the toy line all the time, but let's take Batman, for instance. You know, there's often a movie, a cartoon. You can always rely on the comic book or nostalgia aspects of Batman. So you can get 3 segments easy, right? So when things are going well, toy stores or toy shelves at the toy stores want to make more money. So if something is hot, they want more of it. Sometimes that can take place as producing more of a given line. So you could theoretically say make more Armada products and sell more. Or if you feel like you've done the planning that is correct for the market, you don't want to make more of something that you will go past your ability to sell it. So maybe you create a new segment to take advantage of the popularity of the brand without and creating a little bit of something new, a little slice for you to make more revenue, make the buyers happy because now they can market Transformers in this case in a bigger way, and you theoretically can get more shelf space. Maybe they expand your space from 2 feet to 3 feet. And that battle of the aisle is an important aspect of that. So in this case, Armada was doing great, better than expected, certainly better than Beast Machines and RID prior to that. So the buyers for the various stores were encouraging us to provide them more stuff. And just a random exclusive here or there, Bloody Tusk Mastodon or, you know, Yellow Optimus, you know, that's nice, but that's not like real big revenue. Those are kind of in and out opportunities. So they wanted a line that we could cobble together, get out quick to essentially make more revenue. Create a segment that'll create more revenue. And to do that fast, you have to use tooling that's available and get it out quick. So that's kind of the background concept of why this would happen.
Now, assembling a team for this, essentially, because you have, like, obviously, you don't need, like you mentioned, any guys doing design because there's no tooling needed here that's brand new. Instead, you probably have more of a team that's deciding deco layouts and I guess maybe deciding what tooling to use based on price point necessities, I would imagine.
Yep. Often, I mean, the technology of Transformers across the 40 years now is quite varied, both in scale, in piece count, in feature set, in deco count, the whole thing. Assembly complexity on the factory side. So you do these calculations. What tooling is available? What will still cost at the price point you want to sell it at? And you make the choices that way. Very similar to how we had done the BotCon toys for a number of years. Mm-hmm. Here's the tooling that's available at the different kind of prices, and what can we do with this?
Well, and especially like you mentioned, like using certain tooling and the piece count and stuff. Some of these stuff that you've repainted or like redecoed with a new deco, some of these toolings come from, at that time, it was 2003 when they were hitting shelves, but you're talking like an Optimus Primal that came out, dare I say, 7 years ago, and would the plastic tolerances and the amount needed and the tooling, like, you're talking like it was an Ultra then, but is it still an Ultra now? Like, did you ever encounter those problems and stuff? So even with the G2 stuff afterwards too.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be trade-offs. I mean, we had, what we called King Atlas, which was a G2 Starscream, I believe.
It was a Machine Wars Starscream that before that was a UK exclusive Skyquake.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So, we wanted, in this case, for this universe segment, we definitely were wanting to stay away from things that were Armada-like. We didn't want to be redundant completely. We had just brought cars back for ID, and now we're doing cars in Armada. It's also an opportunity if you're going to get more shelf space to provide a different type of product. So that's why there's a lot of Beast War characters in there.
And Beast Machines, yeah. Even some Beast Machines tooling, too.
Beast Machines. To provide a different look in that little stripe of that 3-foot area. You want it to call itself out. Maybe you'll get a whole new segment collector, or someone will just like that stuff more for various reasons. They like beasts, or they like the sophisticated coloring, or the story, whatever.
And also, like, again, the choices of characters, was there anything really deliberate with that? Was that more just, hey, we have the trademark for Silverbolt needs to be done again, or Inferno, or Ratchet? Or was it something a little more deliberate in terms of a story standpoint? Like, how did you fall on some of those decisions? Because when you look at universe, it's all over the place, obviously. Like, it's representing the universe of Transformers, but were any of those character choices deliberate?
Not deliberate, no. I don't believe. I mean, we may have known, like this this Optimus.
Yeah, Optimus Primal,
is a cool
yeah.
item.
Yeah.
The Manta Ray is a cool item, but it wasn't so tactical. We had this loose story that we kind of concocted to create a reason why they're all together, because they are so varied. Mm-hmm. But it really wasn't thought out to the same level, because it didn't need to be as a show-based property segment, right?
And ultimately, in the end, the decision to do even any kind of lore, like a comic book and stuff, was that more so just your relationship that you had at the time with Glenn Hallett and BotCon, which would later become OTFCC temporarily?
Yeah, it was free turf to run with, because we knew we would never make a cartoon or anything with that, so we kind of threw it over the wall to them if they could utilize it.
Well, I noticed also, like, at that time, a lot of the BotCon product started to also have that universe branding to it, so I imagine there was some kind of connection there, too. In terms of the story, like having Unicron, where did that all come from? Was that because you guys already had used Unicron with Armada, now you want to use him here, too, as another big bad foil, or where did that all spawn from?
I'm not sure, because it gets a little fuzzy in my mind with the Supercross pitch.
Okay.
But clearly I had it in my head that, you know, Unicron lives in the background trying to do what Unicron does, right?
Yeah.
So in this case, somehow he was going, I guess, in the retcon with his 4 horsemen, going across some sort of universes, a la Supercross pitch, and grabbing these guys, or these guys are the ones that show up to do the fight. But it wasn't much deeper than that.
Yeah, again, for people that aren't aware, there really was just a short-run comic book that was kind of patching it together, some text stories, and that really was it. Like like you said before, this was more so a line that existed just to have the shelf space and more product due to the success of Armada and everything, and pretty much nothing more. But we did get a lot of cool stuff out of it. I do want to address a question, because a lot of times this has come up. There was 2 items that were available during that first year. There was in Wave 3, the Deluxe Class Inferno and Ratchet. On their packaging, under their names, it said Machine Robot Rescue. For many years, people have always wondered, was that related to Bandai and what they were doing with Machine Robo Rescue in Japan, and was that a way to protect, you know, your market with other transforming robots?
So, absolutely. We went to Japan during the development of Armada, and for those who don't know the history of it, Machine Robo Rescue is the real pedigree of GoBots in Japan, and they were bringing it back. Bandai was actively creating, you know, 5-pack combiners of every theme. They're very colorful, easy, and fun.
They had an anime.
They had a show. Absolutely.
So there was a lot of effort going on that end.
Yeah. So we looked at what they were doing and the potential of that coming to America. And I don't know how we stumbled upon this, but I think between Michelle and I, who are always kind of tactical this way, we're both Virgos, we kind of were like, well, Machine Robot Rescue or Machine Robo Rescue is not secured in the United States. So why don't we secure that and put it on some, you know, toy, as the trademarks go. As long as you use it, it doesn't have to make sense or be the lead communicator at all. It's just part of the name. And so we put it on those 2 items. We created some kind of deco, you know, that the emergency deco to kind of create the theming, and use that term as a somewhat defensive block, but subtle, but defensive block. And I actually had heard from a person that ended up working at Hasbro, who had worked at Bandai, that pretty much gummed up their effort to bring it in the United States, because if you do go to YouTube or somewhere and look at the anime, they had machine like MRR on
everywhere.
They had it everywhere. They had it on doors, on bumpers, on signage. It was like we put the Autobot logo places, right? They were putting MRR all over the place. So when Hasbro secured Machine Robo Rescue or Robot Rescue, what he told me was Bandai couldn't come up with another name that could be cleared based on what we had done that used MRR. And that alone stopped that from coming into the United States.
To kind of play off of that, how often was Hasbro kind of self-aware? Because, you know, like when you think about it from the Western side of things, let's ignore Japan, and they're the land of the robots, and they got robots coming out of their butt. But when you're talking, you know, America, especially like early 2000s, Gundam is just starting to finally get its foot wet in America. They had the Gundam Wing cartoon that came out just a few years prior. But otherwise, when you thought robots, especially transforming robots, it was Hasbro's Transformers, and that was it. You know, GoBots have been dead and then bought up by Hasbro at that point through the Tonka purchase. And it's something that how often did Hasbro, Brian Goldner, whoever it was, either leads, would say, hey, we got to really secure the robot part of the toy aisle. Power Rangers obviously was the only other robot property, but Power Rangers has a lot of different play elements that aren't primarily just robots.
Yep.
It's also kaiju, it's monsters, it's kung fu.
Yeah, every brand has, and thusly every segment also should have its own DNA. So, and the marketing team, which is what they do, is how do you protect your unique position in the market. So for Transformers, we had history, we had terms, Autobots, Decepticons, names, right? Cybertron, Energon, things like this. And you're always trying to say that you're the unique flower amongst all the flowers. So we have transforming robots that do this and that, and you put this Minicon in and it does this. And that's kind of how they view the world, right? So if you can prevent or leverage your unique skill set so nobody else can get into that space, you can own it. This is very much territorial war-like mentality about owning the shelf space. If you can get 4 feet, let's get another Transformer segment. Well, that's all great for me in Hasbro, because now we went from 2 feet to 4 feet. Somebody lost that 2 feet.
Yeah.
Turtles disappeared, or Justice League animated disappeared, based on our success. And that's how these companies play it. They're not in love with the brands. They're in love with the mechanism that the brand is promoting itself to make, commerce happen. So that's where we were, and that's how we thought of it. So using a term that we can secure, Machine Robo Rescue, you could say that it's tactical, that it's a bit of a cock block, if you will.
Oh, yeah.
But it's also good governance. It wasn't something we had to use a lot, but it kind of blocked the road off for them for a little bit.
And not to mention the long-term ramifications. If, let's say, hypothetically, Machine Robo gets into the market and it becomes... I would compare it to, let's say, here's Pokemon, it's holding up the market, it's doing great, it's making big numbers,
yep.
And then here comes Digimon.
Yep, here comes Digimon, and then
Yu-Gi-Oh! And then all of us, and the thing is with Digimon is it's still around in some shape or form nostalgically within the Western audience. But imagine if Pokemon was somehow able to block that for whatever reason, and then we would not have this Digimon nostalgia and story today. It's the same thing. Imagine if somehow Machine Robot Rescue or Machine Robo Rescue would have been able to get in, create a market. Now there's this whole audience that grew up on that, and it still permeates and exists. Who knows? Maybe Bandai of America would still be around today. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it could have been. I mean, they were very simple and brightly colored, so I'll give them that. That's always going to be somewhat attractive. They were fairly
had a combiner
priced.
element.
Yeah, I think they were fairly priced from what I recall. So I could play that out with you and go, well, they brought a younger, simpler, quicker action. So would we have gone less complex, faster?
Yeah.
To compete, or would we have gone more rescue bots faster, away from Cybertron, maybe away from something that we ended up doing? It's tough to say, but had that made it to the market, it would have pulled our decision making in various ways for sure. Just to someone steps into your turf, you kind of have to stand up to them.
And that line especially, too, was if you watch the show and you look at the toys, they were aimed at a younger demo also. So it's something that would have been, like you said, years later, Hasbro would start looking at, go bots and then rescue bots afterwards to kind of look at that young demo and prior to that when they did the 1, 2, 3 Transformers. But, something like that clearly could have been a competitor in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So sometimes you can snuff the competitor out before they even think to show up. Now, I'll give you another story. There was a guy at work who in, I want to say 2002, he had put in this is at Hasbro. He had put in for to get the trademarks for all the He-Man names.
Interesting.
And he was 6 months too late. Oh Mattel had let all those names lapse because they hadn't made toys. And Hasbro literally was 6 months off potentially owning names like Skeletor and Man-at-Arms and things like that. Which you can, I mean...
And just for context...
Just the craziness that would have
Just for context, in 2003, Mattel would have their 2K3 He-Man series.
Yeah, it was right on the edge. Like, we just...
So imagine you would have just totally dismantled all of that.
Oh, we would have... Yeah. Mattel would have had to buy back its own names from Hasbro.
Oh my good. Well, that's the war of it. That's why on I don't want to promote my podcast, but it's like, we talk about trademarks and licensing all the time because that's so important on the background of it. But that's an insane story. If that would have happened, my God.
It was like 4 or 6 months. It was so close. We were just like, we could have changed the world. I mean, that's really how we felt about it. Because I've talked openly about how we had a mental competition as well as an actual competition with Mattel. So to be able to play those games and win, that would have been amazing.
And as a Transformer fan, with the Skeletor trademark, all the bludgeon repaints that would have come from it.
Yeah, I mean, it just... But so while that didn't work out for Hasbro for He-Man, we certainly did it to Bandai, and I wonder how Bandai feels. You know what I mean?
Well, it let's put it this way. Like I said, the domino effect, the butterfly effect, the domino effect, however you want to word it. I mean, they're not here today, so it's something where if they probably back then would have been able to have 1 or 2 or 3 brands to lean on that were bringing in some kind of revenue outside of just Power Rangers, which is really what was their bread and butter for the longest time. Because, again, well, as huge as Gundam is in Japan, it didn't find its market. And still to this day, I love Gundam, but it just doesn't find its market here in the West.
You know what? But, I mean, just as a little aside, that early 2000s Gundam blip where they did sell model kits and they did sell those kind of articulated figures.
Yeah, Mobile Suit in Action.
That opened up the ability for Hasbro to look at Zoids and Metabots more seriously.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was like, oh, the model kit thing is more accessible than maybe we realized. And, oh, the Japanese game stuff is more, there's more stuff out there we can explore. So, Gundam helped.
It did open up the doors a little bit. It made, like you've said many times, the toy hobby is fashion. Things change, and then things become in vogue. And it's something where, Bandai took the risk so that other companies could look at those risks and then assess how to properly implicate them. I use Sega as a great example. Sega, as a video game company, always took the risk. Oh, we're going to be the first ones to do CD. Or we're going to be the first ones to do color handhelds. Or we're going to be the first ones to do internet downloadable video game content. And then other companies would just watch them make the mistakes and then do it better later.
Yeah.
And so I think that, maybe Bandai was an example of that, where they were just always kind of, because again, they came from the world of robots and, just so much over there.
And I should add that, we had an extreme advantage because the Japanese companies didn't have the inroads to the market into the, selling into Target and Walmart and places.
Yeah.
So we could be more nimble. I don't think it's in the nature of the Japanese toy companies in the early 2000s to look at themselves as nimble.
No. They also focused on their own market primarily.
Yeah, they definitely did. Absolutely they did. But so that created a, again, if this is asymmetric warfare, that created a ability for us to surround our part of the world with higher walls, right? By kind of taking little things away from them so that they were going to have problems coming to the States anyway. We made it even tougher, right? Mm. And that's why Takara partnered with Hasbro for all those years on Metabots and Ikara or E-Karaoke or what. whatever that was.
Ikara, yeah.
You know, Zoids, Transformers, Metabots. There were a couple others. Beyblade, beat 'em on. You know, because they didn't want the hassle of trying to sell it into the United States. We have the connections with the buyers. We understand the market better. You know, the global market is, a universe away from what the China or the Japanese exclusive market is.
Well, even Takara, they would sell in a lot of their product in South Korea through Sonokong.
Yes.
Like they didn't want to have to bother with it for even South Korea.
Yeah.
Which is right there for them.
Yeah.
You know, it's right across the pond.
So, you know, in that regard, you know, those Japanese toy companies, and that's why Bandai dominates, because they actually got out of that bubble a little bit more than all the others, right?
Well, Power Rangers really
Power
helped them a
Rangers,
lot.
yeah.
In 93 was a great year for
Undeniable.
them. Yeah.
I mean, I lived in Power Rangers Shadow. I talk about how great Batman was and how it was the #1 boys brand and one of the best brands you could have worked on at Kenner because of the prestige of having cartoons and movies and action happening. But it was dwarfed by Power Rangers.
Yeah.
I mean,
it
wasn't
lived
even
that
like
era.
we were competing. We were happy to be #2 because it was so far from #1.
Another thing that I want to cover here is because while the Universe line had a whole bunch of repaints and redecos and stuff like that, there was 2 unique items. One of them that ended up becoming an Energon item, another one that has a unique story, which I want to hear your part of it. The first one, we'll talk about the Energon item that was supposed to be a Universe item. It's that of the Grimlock Swoop Mega Dinobot Combiner 2-pack.
Yep.
So supposedly this was supposed to be a Universe item. That is correct?
Yeah.
Now, what ultimately in the end made that a Energon item instead? Aside from obviously that combining element that seems to be more on brand with what Energon Superlink was doing at the time.
Yeah, I think we had that item in development. First of all, that item was a tactical opportunity for Hasbro to explore what it could do without Takara.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that, I'll be straight up front. You know, that's why that item is a little rougher around the edges, a little weirder. Maybe not.
Could I also want to ask, who designed that? Because we have no information on who designed it. Because we know Marcelo did packaging art.
Marcelo did the packaging art. Don Figueroa did a lot of the kind of rough design work, I should say. And then Brian Parrish, I think, ran that through the system with HFE.
Excellent. Good to know. Let's update the wiki on that
So,
one.
so Brian Parrish was responsible for the decos for this universe segment. We were so busy, and I only had co-ops at this point, and maybe Eric was just coming online full time. So I was able to steal a designer from Star Wars, I think in between episode 2 and 3.
You'd be right. Yes.
To just execute this set of decos. And I'd worked with Brian on Batman as a co-op and on Star Wars as a designer. So I was happy to have Brian into the Transformer fold. He's a great guy. He and I were on a bowling team together for years. So Brian Parrish is a good friend of mine. Certainly gets his praises sung in the Star Wars world and now Rescue Bots world. But yeah, he was involved with Universe all the way back here. And so he came from Star Wars, and that's why a lot of these have these sophisticated colors.
Okay.
Because if you think of the color palette and tonality of Star Wars coloring on spaceships and stuff, and then look at the Universe segment, you'll start to go, oh, okay, that's why these look a little different than the crazy colors Aaron would use.
Well, especially like when you look at those first early waves, a lot of them had very nice like just airbrushing on them and stuff.
So
he
came from that, you know, blast effects and scorch marks and all that kind of stuff that you see on those vehicles. And he really challenged Takara to change their painting game, because the things we could get done in our HFE factory partners, Takara wasn't as interested in trying, because it's more inconsistency. You know, when you have a free floating plate, you know, you might have one that goes 3 centimeters, and you might have one that goes 2.5 centimeters. To the Americans, we're like, oh, that's a cool burn. To the Japanese, it's like, that's wildly inconsistent.
Makes sense.
So
though.
they did not like what we were doing there, but again, it wasn't their problem because they weren't going to put these out in their market, so they just kind of dealt with it. But
yeah, that's another thing to address too, is that this Universe line was specifically United States, Canada, with limited European releases with the exclusives. But yeah,
because again, it was a store opportunistic opportunity to kind of flex your elbows a little bit, get a few more inches of shelf space, and we can sell another X thousands of dollars of merchandise for our brand's bottom line that year. So going back to the 2-pack, I think by the time we got that going, Universe was naturally playing itself out. We weren't going to keep that endlessly going. We had other ideas for other segments. So I think by the time that worked its way through production, it just naturally made sense to put it in rather than be a really, really low-end, end-of-wave Universe item that not everybody even picked up. Well, let's put it in Energon that'll just get more traction. And then our price per molding it is going to be better, right?
And it worked. It's funny how that all worked out, too, just because of how the theme play with Energon was to begin with the whole top-bottom combiner element, and that just happened to work out that way.
Yeah.
So
I really like that item. I like, again, like I talk about some different items here and there. I like that we were challenging ourselves to try something new. I like that we were willing to take classic characters and reinvent them somewhat. It was nice to get those classic characters particularly out at that time.
Well, especially considering, think about it, in 2003, what new Grimlock toys did we have based off of the classic character?
Yeah.
Zero.
It was going to be it was going to be a minute. Yeah.
There was just a trademark name used for a Dinobot repaint during Beast Wars. Nothing in Beast Machines. Again, a trademark use for a construction character in Robots in Disguise.
Yep.
Nothing in Armada. There's not going to be a reissue because that tooling for the original Grimlock was MIA, for the original 1985 G1 tooling.
Yep.
And so this was, and we're still 3 years away from classics being a thing. So this was truly the return of this character in any shape or form.
Yep.
In Transformers.
It let us again, when you have your shelf and you're looking at all the variety, it gave us a chance to do some dinosaurs that otherwise weren't anywhere near the line. Mm-hmm. Bring back those classic characters and try a feature set. Interesting items. We were testing ourselves, pushing some newness. Again, I'm not. It certainly proved that we were not anywhere near where we wanted to be when Takara made an item. But I will say at the time also, we knew even then we were really pushing the limit of how much we could rely on Takara. And I always say it that way, not that they ever let us down. But, this is another corporation that has employees, and they make their decisions of the size of their team based on their decisions. And then they work with this other company to make other stuff, right? And we just kept coming. More and more and more. More redecos with a new head. Try this new paint style. Let's do some stuff that comes from Hong Kong, HFE, that you guys are going to have to figure out in the end. We were really jamming Takara up at this point. So we were looking for outlets to see if we jam them up so much that they said, hey, we can only do 150 items a year, and we needed 300. What would we do? Hasbro wasn't going to just throw up its arms and go, okay, I guess that's the limit of our business.
We're going to wait, yeah.
So we were actively in the background trying to figure out different ways, working with people like Don Figueroa and Marcelo and Ken. Can you guys design Transformers? Not just the pretty pictures, but how they move and what's involved, and really pushing that potential that never came, right? You always want to be prepared, with both your staff and your where you can manufacture or what happens if. So this was a what happens if kind of project too.
And definitely was. The last one we're going to talk about in terms of unique tooling and stuff, and it was, in theory, technically the very last Universe item before its new rebranding as part of the Classics line. There was the Chevy Aveo Swerve. So this was still an enigma for many fans. They always wanted to get it but didn't know how to get it because there were so many different, oh, this is how you get it, that's how you get it. Oh, you got to test drive a car and stuff. We have our own story here in Canada of how we got it, which was, well, first, maybe we'll cover that in a moment. But so what was the Chevy Aveo Swerve? How did that come about and everything?
So this ties in a little bit to movie stuff, but it is kind of separate, and that's why it wasn't in the movie packaging. Because
it was labeled as a Universe item.
Yeah, that would have incurred a bunch more royalties that we didn't need to pay for a promotional item. So
that makes sense, yeah.
That's why I think it ended up in Universe. So what that was Chevy was working with Michael Bay and thus Hasbro on the movie stuff, at least in early discussions. And somebody in the marketing department thought it would be a great idea to promote their new car that's coming out in Europe with a Transformer toy. And to your point, it went through many iterations as far as how it got released in various markets. But what I can tell you is that item was a exclusive paid by Chevy toy to get made for their needs. And that is why to this day you haven't seen it redecoed. Hasbro Takara doesn't own the tooling.
Oh, really? Okay,
for that item. For them to get the volume they wanted and have the control that they wanted to buy the tooling. So that they essentially made a boutique toy for themselves.
And it's kind of funny because there was many different ways that it was like, if you test drive an Aveo.
Yeah, it started you had to really, I think buy an Aveo, test drive and buy
an Aveo, then
it just kept backing off from there.
And what ultimately happened, and this is where I blame Canada for messing the market here. Around, I want to say 2010 or something, there was a giant mall here in Canada, specifically in Toronto. Chevy was there, and they were literally just handing them out to people, right? And what happened was TFCon's staff talked with them and said, "How many cases of this do you have?" And they're like, "Oh, we got cases," And so we ended up getting I want to say 7 cases of these. There was maybe 100 units. And keep in mind, these come in baggies, not card backs.
Yeah.
And they probably 400, 500 of these. And then apparently the other cases of them just ended up in dollar stores all over Ontario, the province of Ontario in Canada.
Yeah, I think they committed to a certain production run, and then they just ended it was up to them to distribute it and all of that. So I think in hindsight, we all know that car didn't become a daily driver epic
that they were hoping for,
epic brand kind of car. So
the next Corolla.
Yeah, exactly.
Civic.
So I can only imagine that the promotion didn't work the way they had initially thought it was going to work. So I'm sure they had plenty of them.
But so I just wanted to cover that one because that was always one of the weird ones. It's technically the last Universe item, but it's always that one has its own stories and history.
Yeah. So for us, that was always the way it was. It was always going to be shipped to them in a bag with instructions. There was never a backer card or
nothing. Yeah.
Any of that. It was a very unique promotional item. I mean, that's how Hasbro looked at it. It was a promotional tie-in.
And just the last thing we're just going to go over is kind of the legacy of Universe, because in a lot of ways it showed Hasbro that, you could get away with a lot of repaints on a heavy nature as just a line on its own, because while Universe kind of ended unofficially around, a year and a half after it started in 2003, we would have other, we'll call them segmentations, other small little pocket lines that were just straight up repaints of previously existing tooling, just to kind of have more product on the shelves. There would be like the Transformers Dinobots line. That was a short little thing. Yep. They would do all kinds of little spin-off stuff. Oh, here's Dark of the Moon, but here's like a Dark of the Moon this, and it's going to have just repaints of previously existing stuff. So I feel like that all really kind of started with Universe, that showed that there is money there.
Yeah.
And
Takara tried their version with their
Robot Masters
around the similar time,
which had some new tooling, some old tooling, and new decos.
Yeah,
and that found
what that era definitely kind of instilled in us is that that Transformers are different than other brands in the fact that, as we all know, look at the Seekers. You could technically sell the same guy 10 times in 10 different decos with maybe a couple different heads thrown in for good measure. And if you had a different name and a different story and bold color choice differences, the Transformer fans accept those as new characters. They're not just redecos. They're not just throwaway, as I've said, expanding the shelf kind of crap. The fans of Transformers buy in if you do it with good names and good choices, and you deviate from the first deco as much as you can, and especially if you can give them new heads and whatnot. But it just creates new characters, and the love is there. So we were really lucky in that regard, because if you did the same thing with a Batman line, it's just redecos. You know what I mean?
And you came from that world where it's like you could redeco Batman, but you better give him new accessories that justify that redeco.
Yeah.
If he's going to be hot orange, he better be Heatwave Batman with a Heatwave gun and this and that. Where with Transformers, it's like just even with not putting a new head.
Yeah.
Starscream, Thundercracker, Skywarp, Sunstorm, Red Wing. Maybe you can even stretch it with the Rainmakers of Acid Storm and Nova Storm and stuff. Like you're talking, you could get up to 14 characters before you have to make a new
Sunstorm,
sculpt on it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's how we kind of started to look at that, because of what we learned a little bit in these segmentation things early on. It was different than the Batman redeco lines, They to the point you were saying earlier, the fans were like, "Is there more content? Can you give us more stories?" So that's what we learned off of that one.
And again, some of the ideas that were born in Universe would live on today. One of them being the unreleased Toxitron character, which was a G2 Laser Optimus Prime repaint in crazy colors, and that would survive today in modern versions and stuff. Night Prowler, which was a Cheetor repaint. Ramjet, which was a repaint of the Armada Skywarp. There was a whole bunch of different characters that were created kind of in Universe that now permeate today in different kinds of repaints and retools and stuff. So there, stuff still exists from Universe that were born there, even today in new versions of those characters. So it's something that it still has a legacy, even though it was something that was only around for a year and a half, and really just to, like you said, to cover shelf space.
Yeah, for me personally, it was really good opportunity early on to continue to kick the tires on the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can see through the Unicron how that manifested itself in Seibertron, and as far as the story goes of collecting different guys and whatnot. So yeah, it was a good learning thing across the board for the products, the franchise, the story of the franchise, the history of the franchise. We learned a lot.
The last thing that we're going to cover before we call it quits, was ever the Beast Wars Neo Unicron tooling ever considered for this at any point? Because there always was rumors among the fans, well, if Unicron is in the background focus of this story, was at any point that tooling ever looked at to be used here or anywhere for that matter? Obviously, we know we have the Armada Unicron, and that exists now. And would we even go back to look at that old tooling? Like, any stories with that?
Yeah, so that model was done Takara was proud of it. It hadn't been tooled up. So they were wondering if we'd be interested in tooling that up. I think both for any purpose, right? Whether it was Armada or anything. I had that model in my office for a couple of months.
Imagine.
Yeah.
Great.
Just sitting there, everybody came up, look at that, What it was very designed to be a Japanese product. It didn't have the level of feature play and kind of ease of communication that we would have probably desired. And it wasn't made to fit a particular price point. So it was going to be a lot more expensive than even the Armada or Unicron.
Because at the end of the day, it was just a big ball robot.
Yeah, it was very chunky and heavy.
Where at least with the Armada Unicron, you got light up eyes, spring-loaded missile in the chest, the Minicon gimmick. There's a lot of feature play there. With this one, I mean, unless I was missing something looking at those gray protos all those years ago, but it really was big ball robot. That's all it was.
Yeah, it was. Very good detail, so it would have looked great, no doubt.
Yeah, of course.
And so it just didn't fit the play need and the price point need that we wanted to have, but it certainly... That model gave us the starting point for what would become Armada Unicron, and certainly thinking about Unicron overall. So it had its place, but Hasbro never really considered it because it was never going to fit a price point, no matter how cool it was. It was, at that time, I mean, a $35, $45 item was on that higher end.
Not to mention around that 2003 time, we're still, we have in the background Masterpiece 20th Anniversary Optimus still not happening yet.
Yeah, so it just didn't fit the era that we needed. And again, we were still introducing Transformers, getting back to basics. So to bring him in and not have a full story with him too was a little dicey.
So that's it more or less. We just kind of wanted to just do like an early kind of starter pack on Transformers Universe 1.0 2003 series, as some fans like to call it. We will probably maybe in the future we'll tackle some individual characters or individual toolings and stuff like that and talk about them. But we just kind of wanted to, how did we get to here? How did that happen? Its long-term ramifications for the brand. And we also just kind of wanted to put a much more smaller segment out for you guys to listen to, especially we're recording this just prior to TFCon Toronto 2025, so we wanted to put out a segment for you guys to listen to in the car while you're driving down to the big con. On top of it all, Aaron will be there. He'll have his art and everything, and Aaron, might as well promote some of your stuff on your website too.
Yep, archermonster.com is where you can find my work and various items I have for sale.
Original art book with great art in it. You got the Posca paintings. You got the high-end, larger paintings and stuff, too, all on archermonster.com. Check that out. And, again, if you're going to be at TFCon, if you're hearing our voice, go check out Aaron's booth, get a signature, get some original art, and come say hi. And that's it, more or less, for the Toy Armada today with Aaron Archer. Aaron, thanks again for regaling us with the tales of the robots in disguise.
No problem. Thank you, Proto. Thanks for everybody for listening.
And we'll talk again in the near future, and thanks again for listening.